Hi guys, Samantha from Jessama Tutorials here, and today I'm going to show you how to create a lentil bead, or at least that's what they're called. And so the traditional lentil bead looks something like this. And so I've seen many tutorials done using this, but I haven't seen any where they actually flatten this out and use it to create something that looks like this. So that is what I'm going to be teaching in the tutorial today. And so I'm going to be using cane ends for this tutorial, and this is a cane end from one of my Larimar attempts. I'm also going to use cane ends from my coral bracelet tutorial and my cherry blossom tutorial. So I'll just show you some beads from there. So I'm going to be using these cane ends as well. So for the moment, I'm going to show you how to take your cane end and turn it into a lentil bead. So what you want to do is you want to pinch up these ends to make them as small as possible, because you want to bring the image of the cane. You want that to be taking up most of your bead. Okay, and then just squish around the edges. And we're trying to form this into a ball, but you need to be fairly careful because we don't want to distort this too much. Okay, and now I can roll it gently, and so we should end up with some spots and some streaks. So just roll it into a nice ball. So there you can see we have our spots here, we have some streaks along the side, and then we have more spots here. So the cane is currently like this. So if you were to cut it in half here, you'd see spots. So what I like to do is I like to off-center this. So we have the spots over here. So I want to off-center it, so we're going to get some spots swirling, and we're also going to get some of the streaks. Now you want some sort of flat, somewhat translucent surface to roll your lentil bead out. I personally like to use an embossing folder. You can use a piece of glass, you can use anything you want, whatever works for you, but I like the embossing folder. And I found that it's easiest if you are using a square piece. Now what I'm doing is I am resting my hands right on my work surface, I'm not picking them up, so that this stays at a consistent height, and I'm just going round and round and round. And you just want to keep rolling round, and you want to try and keep your rotations round, otherwise you'll find that your bead can sometimes turn oval. If that happens, which it might, it happens quite often to me, you just can gently take the embossing folder off and squish it back into place. Now remember, you always need to be rolling in the same direction to get your swirl. If you ever change direction, so start rolling this way, you will reverse the swirl and you'll end up with a bit of a mess. So always go in the same direction. So you just want to start swirling. Now another thing, if you make larger swirls, you'll find that your lentil bead will become like this, and if you start doing really small ones, you'll find that it kind of flattens out like that. So I like to do something in between, and you'll get the hang of this. It takes a little bit of practice, so maybe practice on some ugly scrap clay first that you intend to just ball up, but it takes a little bit of practice. And the nice thing about the thing that we're doing is, even if you don't get that swirl completely right and you don't get your lentil bead completely symmetrical, you can still use it in this project because you're going to be flattening it out and moulding it. Whereas if you make your lentil bead, you want that swirl to be perfect, you'd want it to be a perfect round, and so that takes a little bit of practice. So this is a nice way to use up your lentil beads that wouldn't have worked perfectly for a lentil. So I'm just swirling, and it takes a little while to drag that clay into a swirl. So let's see if it's gotten there. So you can see it was starting to get swirl, and the other side will also have a swirl. So I'll just continue going like that, And now I've got a bunch of other scraps of my Larima or my pool water cane, whichever one you want to call it, of course. I have a few scraps from my coral bracelet and the same with the cherry blossom. So I'm going to go and make quite a few beads of those. And then I'm going to make quite a few lentil beads from those. Then I'll show you the different shapes that we are going to mold these lentil beads into. And then I'll sand and buff them and show you what they look like. So this is the lentil bead, and you can see that it's a little bit oval, but that's perfectly fine, you don't have to worry about that. You can see that we have a little bit of a swirl on the back as well. So you want to go and get a bunch of cane scraps that you think would look nice like this, turn them into lentil beads, and then we can move on to the next step. And I'm going to be showing you how to create these 3 shapes. So here, let me just grab those. There we go. So I'm going to be showing you how to make a diamond, triangle and teardrop in the next step. Okay, so I finished up our lentil beads and I've made a whole bunch. Now I have already turned some into different shapes, and I'm going to be showing how to create these 3 shapes over here. So I'm going to show how to create a teardrop, a triangle and a diamond. So I'll put those aside for the moment and I'll put these over here, and we'll make these into something in a little while, but for the moment I'll focus on this one over here. Now of course you could leave them like this if you wanted to, but personally I don't really like them like this because I find that they're hard to sand. I don't really know how to use them, or I don't have any ideas for using them, and it's very hard to actually get them completely symmetrical as far as I go. And I'm not a big fan on the shape. I much more prefer it to flatten it out and turn it into a pendant. So I'll bring over the embossing folder again, and I'm just going to gently flatten the top over here. And we'll use this embossing folder to just gently flatten out the top of our pendant. And it's going to flatten out the back as well. And then we can do the same on the back and the front, and we'll just use our fingers to do the rest. And now these edges have quite a sharp edge. Just go and blunt it and bring it in so that you flatten the entire pendant. Now you could also make a round one. I guess I haven't thought of that yet. I personally prefer the teardrops and the more more free-form shapes, but you could turn it into a circular pendant if you wanted to. You could make it into a completely arbitrary shape. Any shape will work. Just try to keep the center of the swirl the center of your pendant. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm just blunting up those edges to get it into a nice nugget-like shape. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out where I want my point to start, and I think I want to start it there. I'm just going to bend it upwards like that, and I'll flip and do the same. Stop bending it upwards. Now you can make a fat teardrop. I want to make a elongated teardrop, and just go ahead and mold. And you want to spend some time doing this. And now I want this part to be the top, though the back over here looks quite cool as well. I want this to be the top, so I'm going to use my fingers to dome it. So the back now will be flat, but it also means that we have this cool pattern on the back, which is nice, so we don't have to do any smears or anything. The entire pattern goes around the entire bead, so it's a very tidy looking bead once sanded and everything. So I'm almost happy with that shape. And now the important thing is to smooth away fingerprints. Those things are a pain and you don't want to have to sand them off, so just take your finger and smooth away those fingerprints. And don't forget to attend to the back as well. And now if your piece is fairly warm, those fingerprints are going to just keep coming back because you're going to be handling it. Just handle it very lightly and try to avoid pressing into it as much as you can. and then once you've smoothed off most of them, you can let this rest for like half an hour, and then you can come back and smooth away the remaining fingerprints, because it will have rested and so it won't take on those fingerprints as easily. So that is our teardrop shape, which is quite nice. Now I'll show you how to create our diamond shape, I think. Or maybe I actually think I want to do the triangle shape on this one. So again, just flatten out that top. Now some of these lentils work, some of them don't. Really depends on the pattern. There we are, flatten that out. Again, just gently blunt up the edges. Now this one's back isn't as nice as the front, so we'll definitely be using this side. Okay. Now we want to figure out where our first point is, and I think over here I want to be the first point. Then we'll move down, make that the third point, and that's the second point, that's the third point. And now we'll just use our tile to press it into a triangular shape. Now this one can be a little hard because you do have to make it somewhat symmetrical, so you might have to work at it a little bit longer than you would the teardrop. It's definitely worth it because it looks quite cool afterwards. So just use your fingers to mold it into shape and stretch out those edges. You can always use the tile as well to get these edges straight. And there, I think that's pretty symmetrical. So I'm figuring out where I'm going to hang it from. I think I'm going to hang it from this point over here. And so I'm going to look at it from all angles so that I can see whether I've got symmetrical or not. This one needs to be a little bit more pointed, same with this. But there we are. I'm quite happy with that. So that is your triangular shape. We'll put that aside. And again, use smooth fingerprints, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. Now I'm going to bring over a lentil bead. I'm just choosing which one I want over here. I think I want this one. Gently flatten that out, and actually this one I don't need my embossing folder because it's softer. And this one we're going to do a diamond, so we'll form a point on that end and we'll form a point on this end. Now we want to try and get this part in the middle. We don't want one end stretching further than the other end. I like to press it against my tile, sharpen up those ends, and then we can always work at it. And I'm busy trying to keep it domed while I'm working because I don't want any flat spots, at least on the top that is. And then just work it into a symmetrical shape, and that's all you need to do. And so that is your diamond shape. And so these are the three shapes that I like, but please play around. You could possibly make a square shape. It will probably be a little bit harder because you need to make sure that's symmetrical, like with a triangle. But you could make triangles, teardrops, completely and utterly arbitrary shapes, circles, diamonds. Play around with it and see what you can do, but it's a great way to use up your leftover canes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bake these and all of my other ones. I'm going to sand and buff them like I usually would, where you just use sandpaper and sand it from a 400 grit up to an 8000 grit. If you have an electric Dremel, then just give it a quick buff, and I'll show you what they look like once they are finished. Okay, so I've finished sanding and buffing and just basically finishing off the beads, and I'm super happy with them. So you can see they're really nice and shiny, and I've noticed that the ones that use the Kato canes have buffed up better. So like this one over here, it's got a really nice buff. This one's got a nice buff. This one too. And this one was made purely of Kato. This one's got some Kato and some translucent Primo in it. These ones are basically pure Primo, and so you can see it, they haven't buffed up as well. They have buffed up pretty well, but not as well as these. This one's like a really clean glossy buff, while this one's more of a satin finish. So I might have to experiment around to find out a little bit more about this, which clay buffs up best, because it's something that I've just discovered now, or at least just noticed now, so I need to play around with that. I'm really happy with how these are, and they look really cool, I think. So I think it's a great way to use lentil beads, and they're much easier to sand. So I do hope that this gave you a few ideas on how to use your lentil beads, and I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please do let me know. And if you do happen to use this technique for using lentil beads, please do post photos so I can see them, and tag me in the photos so that I know when you post the photos. You can post them on my website. I have a place where you can send in photos, and you can also post it on Facebook and just let me know when you post it. And as always, I hope to see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.